Tabletop Simulator is such an awesome game with nearly limitless possibilities. And recently, I have joined the thousands of people who have made workshop items by recreating one of my favorite games inside of TTS. And so I wanted to make this video to share what I have learned throughout this process to help you manifest your ideas into Tabletop Simulator. It really isn't as difficult as you might think. No matter what kind of project you're looking to create or remake, it all starts off with the table. All of the pieces, pictures, and games for your creation are going to be in the Objects tab, and this includes tables. We have quite a few default tables to choose from, including some custom ones as well. But the custom ones is just a custom picture on top of the table. So this might be cool for certain types of board games, but it's just a picture. And one of the most frustrating parts that I came across was I wanted multiple tables, or I wanted to change the size of a pre-existing table. And maybe you can do this through scripting, but there definitely is not an easy, user-friendly way to do this. But thankfully, the workshop comes to the rescue. There have been a bunch of people who have made their very own free-use custom tables for you to choose from. My all-time favorite one is this Kraken table right here. It even has drawers for you to store game pieces in. It has foldable arms for the table. But one thing about these custom tables is they're typically not actually tables. They're actually an object that is sitting on top of the table. So whenever you see a game room that has 6, 7, 8 tables spread all over the place, those typically aren't tables. As far as I understand, there's no way to make more than one table in a room. So what we can do is place giant objects on top of a pre-existing table and just make them look like they're separate tables. So right off the bat, we have to change the way we think about what the table is, that objects can actually be tables too. Aside from tables, the next thing that gave me the most trouble was figuring out how to make a custom deck of cards. Inserting a custom deck from the Objects tab will bring us this pop-up where we can insert an image file for the face of the cards. But this is a page of cards, not each card individually. And rather than creating these pages by hand, the Tabletop Simulator has some built-in modding tools. If we right-click on it, go to Properties, Installed Files, and then click Browse, this will bring us to our local files for TTS. Then if we click on the Modding folder, we can see some of the tools that it comes with. It comes with templates for dice and cards and decks, but also the Deck Builder has a TTS deck editor. This will auto-generate the page files from individual pictures that you have. So if we open up a new deck, it'll ask us how big the deck will be. The default 10 by 7 means that there are going to be 70 total cards. But if we go to File, Add Cards, we can now import any number of individual card pictures, and we don't even have to count how many there are. If you upload more pictures than slots, it will automatically open up decks to compensate until it has enough decks open to load all of the cards you chose. Now the very last slot on each page is special. If you want to upload a card to that slot, you will have to add an additional card after you've created the entire page. Because this slot is specifically what the cards will look like when they're being held in the hands of players if you have hidden hands turn on. So by default, it's just going to be a black rectangle. So this isn't necessarily a card slot, but what the cards look like when they're being hidden, or when they're being held by players other than you. And we'll talk more about that later on. But when you're done, you can either save the deck as a project, or you can export the deck as the page file. You can just leave all of this to the default and click Export. This will generate a PNG file of all of your individual cards on a grid in a page. And once you have the page PNGs, you can upload that to the face section of a custom deck. Now anytime you upload a file, it'll ask you if you want to save it to the cloud or just store it locally. The final version does need to be cloud, but I would recommend starting off with local until you're sure that it is exactly the way you want it. Because I found myself uploading the file to the cloud like 10 different times, and then my cloud files were all unorganized and I'd have to go in and delete like 9 of them. So I would recommend just starting off locally, then uploading the final versions to the cloud. Now the same way with the card back, this is what the cards will look like individually when you flip them over. And then the width and the height should be the same dimensions as you chose for the deck. Now, if you want like square cards, you could make them square with the width and the height, but you would also have to make the page file generate square tiles as well, which I don't think that the built-in editor can do. At least I couldn't find that setting. But then the number is the number of cards in the deck. The default deck template has 70 slots, but the last of which, again, is for what the cards will look like when they're hidden, not what the physical back of the cards look like. If you generate a deck with more cards than are on the template, they will just be blank. So you don't have to be super precise with the number of cards in the deck, because you can always just delete the extra ones. Now the picture that we inserted into the last slot of the page file is again what you see when the cards are hidden in other players' hands. So like the backs of those cards right there. Whereas the back of the card image that we upload directly to the deck inside of Tabletop Simulator is this right here, that we can see in our own hand or when cards are flipped over on the table. So the page file that has the faces of the cards will dictate the hidden picture, whereas the backs of the cards will be dictated in-game. Now we can also add names and descriptions to any object that we add to the table. And what this does is if you highlight that object, it'll give you a name. And if you keep hovering over that object, the description will pop up. So not only can this be used for quality of life as quick references for names or abilities, but naming objects also allows those objects to be searched when they're in a stack. So if we search a deck of cards for a name, it will pop up with all of the names that match that. But since the only thing we have in this stack that's named is the boots, no matter what else we search for won't pop up. Now naming and adding descriptions to thousands of objects can be a huge pain. Luckily, there are tons of awesome people who have made user-friendly tools for us to use, such as this card naming tool that I got from the workshop. Without going into too much detail, if we right-click the card naming tool and go to the scripting editor, this includes all of the instructions of how to use this thing. And basically, we just copy and paste the section that it gives us and insert all of the information for all of our names and descriptions. So for the card game that I uploaded, I went through and wrote out all of this information. I wrote erratas in the descriptions and formatted all of this correctly so that I can just copy and paste this into this section and then use it from here so that I don't have to name every single card and add descriptions to every single card. So I still have to generate the notepad file, but it makes it a whole lot easier so I don't have to go through each individual object and name and add descriptions. So then to use this, we just need the deck that corresponds with the scripting that we wrote, then just flip this deck over right here, press Find Deck, and then press Start. And now it will automatically add all of the names and descriptions that we had in our file that we copy and pasted. So as we can see, this entire stack of cards now has names and descriptions. So especially if you want to have a deck of cards that is searchable, this is a really fantastic way to do it. And then if you ever need to add anything later on, you can still just right-click the objects and add names and descriptions. And this goes for stacks of cards as well. You can name stacks of cards, add descriptions to them, and they will be totally separate from the individual cards' names and descriptions. So this goes for any object. And then any object that you want to save, you just right-click, press Save Object, name it, and choose Where. And then from there, you can reload this from your saved objects onto any table. So regardless of what kind of table you're using or game you're constructing, it's all going to be made out of objects, whether you use the default objects like the dice or custom objects like cards. One of the most important objects that we need to go over are the bags. We have infinite bags and regular bags. The infinite bags will infinitely pull out whatever object you place inside the bag. So if we place a dice in here, we can now infinitely pull out this dice from this bag. Or if we reset it by right-clicking and pressing Reset, and then we put something else in here, like a rule book, we can now infinitely grab rule books out of this bag. Whereas the regular bag is just a container. Whatever items you put in the bag are the items that will get pulled out of the bag, in the reverse order from what you put them in. So these bags are your containers for tokens or money or dice or anything that you need a bunch of for your game, whether limitless or limited. Now we can also right-click them and change their color by going to Color Tint, But that's about all the customization we can do directly to a bag. There's no custom option. But for deck boxes or chests or some kind of custom container, we can make those. We just have to go to the custom objects and then go to model. This is one of the most versatile objects. It can basically be anything in the game. And it also allows us to upload an object file, like a 3D rendering of what the object should be. So if we go to my cloud really quick, I have this deck box object, which is a 3D OBJ file of a deck box. And so we can copy this, then go back over here to model mesh, and this is where we insert the 3D file that we want this object to be. And then the type down here is what type of object this is. So if we click bag, this will now be a container because it will function the same as a bag. So now we have this object that no longer looks like a bag, but still functions the same as that container. So just remember that bag equals container when it comes to this game. So if you want to have boxes for cards or, basically just cutesy stuff, if you don't want to use the default bags, you can create your own 3D objects that function like a bag. But unlike the default bags, we now have this custom option if we right-click the object, where we can change the mesh model, the object file. We can add a diffuse image to the thing, like a skin that wraps around the object, and other various cosmetic options, like what material it's made out of, what sound it makes when you pick it up and drop it, just all kinds of cutesy stuff. But the two main ones are the object file, which is what shape it is, and then the diffuse image, which is the skin that's wrapped around that object. The biggest reason why containers are super important is that the items inside of containers don't actually load until they are taken out of the container. And I don't think a lot of workshop creators know this, but if you load your table full of stuff, it takes other people like 15 minutes to load this workshop item. You'll load it instantaneously because you already own all the files on your cloud, but other people have to download those files every single time. So please put objects that are not used inside of containers, and then even put those containers inside of drawers if your table has drawers. This will dramatically cut down on lag and loading time, and especially for things like rule books or multiple decks of cards for multiple players. Do you really need these things to load first every single time you play? Or can you put them inside of a container or a drawer so that people can just load them when they need access to them? That helps dramatically. So please put all unnecessary things inside of containers. Speaking of rulebooks, we can add a custom PDF by going to the Objects, then the Custom Objects tab. The custom PDF will allow you to replicate a book. You upload a PDF file, which has multiple pages, and then it will pop up as a flat 2D image that you can scroll through. So it's basically just like a book. It doesn't have book animations, and it's just a flat image to cut down on loading times and stuff like that, but it functions as such. So odds are that most of the objects that you use are going to come from the Custom Objects tab, because these are the ones that you can actually upload different pictures to, or even object files. And all of the rest of these objects are very user-friendly, so we're not going to expend too much time on them, because all they are is an image. You just upload a PNG or a JPEG, and it will place that on top of the board, tile, figure, whatever. Now, one thing I will say is to try to free yourself from limited thinking. Just because you need a board for your board game doesn't mean that you have to use the board object. You could use tiles or cards, and then just resize those to fit whatever type of, board you're trying to recreate. Another important tool is your ability to lock and unlock objects. If you have a Monopoly board, you wouldn't want people to accidentally pick up the board and move it around. So we can press L while highlighting any object, and it will toggle that object between locked and unlocked. We can also just right-click the object and toggle the locking from there. So you could lock objects into groups to create more custom things. But some other things to go over is that this icon in the bottom right will let you write notes that will appear on the screen and stay on the screen for all players anytime that they log into this workshop item. So common rules reference or instructions. We also have a notebook up at the top that we can write information in, whether it be rules or tips and tricks. If we write it in the gray notebook, every player who joins will be able to read this at any time. But if we write it in a specific color of notebook, only the player who has chosen that color will be able to read that notebook. So if you're playing an asymmetrical game where players have different rules or different scenarios, you can use the rulebook to provide information to different players. We also have an options tab up here that has lots of cutesy things. You should just kind of scroll through all of these and see what they do. Like the lighting is important to finalize what everything looks like. Maybe the table is too dark or too bright, and so you can change all the appearances through the lighting. Now, one of the most important ones for quality of life is the hands tab in the options menu. Please check mark the disable unused hands. Basically, no table does this and it gets in the way all the freaking time. So what this does is if you don't have that checked and you drag objects to the hands of players who aren't in the game, the objects automatically get rotated and flipped into those players' hands. And this just gets so annoying. But if you check mark disable unused hands, then it only uses the hand areas for the players who are actually in the game. Most games, you don't need to have universal hand regions. Now, if you are playing a game that needs universal hand regions, by all means, leave that unchecked. But for the most part, it's just so nice to have that turned off. While on the subject of hand zones, if we want to edit these in any way, we just go over to the left on the Zones tab and click on Hands. And this will show us all of the hand zones, how big they are, where they are, what color they are. And then if we click on the Gizmos tab here on the left, we can change everything about where these are. We can change how big they are, we can rotate them, lift them up, move them around. And so what hand zones actually are just private player-specific areas. So for most games, it's going to be a hand of cards. You know, like poker or most board games are going to have private cards. But then you have some games like Clue, that you have a whole private section where you're writing down all of your clues on your piece of paper that you don't want other people to see. Or for D&D, the Dungeon Master has his own private zone with all of his information and guides and stuff. And so we can copy and paste these, just like any other object. We can resize them to be whatever size we need. Just keep in mind that these are private zones for the specific color of player that matches these color of zones. Which finally brings me to my very last talking point, and that is how to use objects from other workshop items. Like maybe your favorite game only has one workshop item version and the cards are blurry, and you want to fix that, but you don't want to go through the process of making the entire game from scratch. Or maybe you found a workshop item that has lots of custom objects that they allow you to use, that are free use. Always give credit where credit is due, but for any workshop item, you can click on the three dots and press search, and that will show you all of the objects inside of this workshop item. This can also be useful if you accidentally delete an object in the middle of a game or something. You can just reload that object from this menu. This also kind of gives you an idea of all of the objects this person made to create this workshop item. So maybe if you're trying to fix blurry cards, you can just fix the blurry cards and keep all of the other stuff, and then give credit to the original creator, of course. And that is all the stuff that I learned and struggled with along the way. So I really hope that this guide helps you out, and I hope to see your awesome projects in the near future. And be sure to check out my workshop item. Magi-Nation is a really fantastic CCG from the early 2000s that is getting a reprinting in the near future. I've always loved this game, and I think you will as well. So check it out, give it a rate, give it a thumbs up, and if you like this video, do the same for it. But more importantly, don't forget to have fun. Bye-bye!